where we listen, we relax, and we get sleepy. Tonight we'll drift into a dreamy retelling of a familiar fairy tale, one that feels perfectly autumnal and gentle enough to lead you into a deep, restful sleep. Before we begin, take a moment to settle in. Make yourself comfortable. Let your shoulders drop, unclench your jaw, and let the day's edges soften. As you settle, allow your breathing to slow. Breathe in gently and let the exhale draw out a little longer than usual. Feel the rhythm of the air as it moves in and out, a steady, soothing tide. If your mind wanders, that's okay. Softly bring your attention back to your breath. Tonight, as I tell this story, think of my words as a warm blanket and the story itself as a lamp dimming slowly until sleep arrives. Once, in a village that sat near rolling woods and a wide, busy port, there lived a merchant named Laurent. He had once been prosperous, his house filled with fine things, his children wrapped in comforts. But fortune is like a changeable sea, and in one season it can be generous, and the next it can take more than you expected. Laurent staked his wealth on a fleet of ships that promised to bring spices and silks. But storms and cruel luck stole them away. The ships never returned. Laurent returned home with heavy news. His household could no longer keep up appearances. Slowly, piece by piece, the family sold their fine furniture, their carriage, the jewelry, and the dresses. Their large house became too costly to maintain, and they moved into a modest cottage at the edge of town. Laurent traveled often now, trying to find partners and investors to rebuild what had been lost. He left his children to manage the home. There were 6 children, 3 sons, and 3 daughters. The 5 eldest had been raised in ease and did not adapt well to the new hardships. They were slow to learn practical work and quick to grumble, but the youngest, Camille, was different. Perhaps it was her age, or perhaps a steady sweetness in her nature. However it began, she took to the chores. She learned to bake bread with the village bakers, to mend clothes, to tend the little garden behind their cottage, and to care for the chickens. In time, the villagers grew fond of her. She was kind and steady, the quiet heart keeping her family from drifting apart. Nearly 2 years passed like this. Then a glimmer of hope arrived. A message that one of Laurent's lost ships had come into port, its cargo still intact. Hope bloomed quickly. The older children imagined wealth restored, dresses and trinkets returned, and an end to the simple life they'd been forced to accept. Camille felt a small pleasure for her family's sake, but something else had changed inside her. She had learned the satisfaction of useful work. She had learned the pleasure of making a home where once there had been only comfort and show. A life of idle luxury no longer looked like a reward. Before Laurent left for the port to reclaim what he could, as was customary, he asked each child what gift they would like from the city. The older siblings asked for silk and jewels and finery. When he turned to Camille, she hesitated. She had a quiet dream, roses. Roses did not grow in their little village. They were exotic and costly. "If you could bring me 1 rose," she said softly, "I would be happy." Laurent smiled, touched by the simple wish, and promised to bring back a bloom. But life has its twists. The ship's cargo, though largely intact, had already been taken by creditors who'd rushed to claim Laurent's assets as soon as word of the recovered cargo spread. He was left without means, no money to buy fine gifts, no way to invest, and his hopes sagged like a flag. On his return journey, night fell and a storm rose. Lightning cracked, wind tore at the trees, and his horse bolted from the road into a dark, unfamiliar wood. by chance or fate, Laurent found himself before the high stone wall and iron gates of a great chateau. The gates stood slightly open, and shelter called to him. He pushed through and guided his horse up the long, rain-swept avenue. The mansion rose, shadowed and grand, its windows like watchful eyes. Laurent knocked, and when no one answered, he pushed the door wide and stepped into a vast, silent hall. A fire burned in a great hearth, and a table was set for one. Hungry and grateful for refuge, Laurent ate. He slept in a warm, strange bed and woke to a chill of embarrassment. He had stayed in another's home without permission. Outside, in the courtyard, Laurent saw a luxuriant pergola overrun with rose bushes. He remembered Camille's wish and, trying to keep his promise, cut the finest blooms he could find. As he turned away with a bundle of roses, a towering figure blocked his path. A man beast-like in appearance, fierce and grim. The man's voice was rough as a winter wind. "You have taken what is mine," he growled. "You ate my food, slept in my chair, and now you have stripped the roses from my garden." Laurent pleaded his poverty, tried to explain his promise to his daughter. The lord of the chateau listened, then declared that if Laurent could not pay, his debt must be worked off by Laurent himself or by one of his family. There was no negotiation. Breathless and bewildered, Laurent returned home with the story and the impossible choice. With heavy heart and practical courage, Camille volunteered to go in her father's place. She packed simply, pressed the rose he had given her into the pages of a book, and set off with him to the chateau. When they arrived, the gates yawned, the path led them beneath ancient trees, and Camille's heart fluttered but did not shrink. A boy opened the door, Gabriel, plain-faced and lively, who led her up broad staircases to a sunny, well-furnished room she could scarcely believe was hers for the night. She was startled to be shown into a bedroom of soft fabrics and a window seat where she could see the courtyard and the rose bush she had once dreamed about. Gabriel was kind in a straightforward, practical way. He put coals on the fire, left a small supper, and spoke of the Baron with a certain loyalty and affection. The Baron himself was a large, grizzled man with an air that made the villagers whisper. He spoke to Camille courteously in his study. He gave her keys and explained her duties. He told her he had few servants now and needed someone to take charge, to make decisions, and to bring order to the house. For a while, Camille felt overwhelmed, this vast, echoing mansion. Its corridors lined with portraits and rooms kept closed for years, but she set to work with a calm heart. Camille's days passed in honest labor. She scrubbed and polished, cleared out dust and cobwebs, made the kitchen into a cozy, bright place, and sent Gabriel to town for supplies. In return, the Baron allowed her to borrow books from his library. The library was more magnificent than anything she'd ever known. Shelves that rose toward the high ceiling, ladder rails that cradled volumes in reds and greens and browns, and tables piled with open books. To Camille, a girl who had learned from scraps of discarded pages, this room was a kind of wonder. She would spend stolen minutes there, tracing careful fingers over spines, feeling the quiet company of those printed words. The Baron, who preferred solitude and whose face made people uneasy, was not unkind. He had been changed by sorrow and folly in years past. He'd once been vain and careless and had lost much. A woman beautiful and blunt had once cursed him, he said, declaring that only a true return to humanity could lift his burden. Years of reading, remorse, and solitude followed. He was a man who had collected wisdom, but had not yet found the thing that would free him. Camille listened, patient and unobtrusive. She tended the house with a gentle diligence that softened its corners. She hired a few villagers to help men who had been wary to approach the chateau, but agreed at her request and her assurance not to touch the treasured rosebush. Those men spoke rudely of the Baron at first, but when they saw how gentle and steady Camille was, and when they felt the quiet dignity in the house, they softened a little. Winter came, and with it a closeness about the fires and the books. Camille wrote to her father, sending him news and a few coins from her wages. In time, she was able to help her family. When spring returned and the courtyard burst into color again, Camille began to see the Baron less as a creature of harsh tales and more as a man shaped by regret, by lessons learned the hard way. In his library, he had been searching for human wisdom. In Camille's steady care, he began to find, slowly, the warmth of companionship. One spring, when Camille wished to attend her sister's wedding, she proposed that the Baron accompany her, if he would. She said, to show her family the man he truly was. He was reluctant, the world's gossip stung him. But Camille was sure the villagers would not judge as harshly as they had, and she was right. When they arrived, the village's whispers rose and quickened. People who had shunned the Baron now softened when they saw him in his new suit, composed and courteous. Some still laughed. Some still scoffed, but Camille spoke up for him in a voice brave and clear. She declared that she would choose this man, his kindness, his care, his quiet courage over any other. And then something like a veil lifted. Where villagers had once seen the fierce, hair-covered figure, they now saw the Baron's true face, handsome and kind. The transformation not of a trick of sight, but of a gentle unbinding. The curse that had held him seemed to dissolve in the warmth of compassion and acceptance that Camille had given. In the garden that had bloomed into a riot of roses, under the pergola whose blooms had once been stripped, the Baron and Camille sat together. He took from his pocket a small velvet box inside, a sapphire ring, the very jewel Camille had once glimpsed in a dusty lady's chamber. He told her she had been the sun that warmed his life. The rest of the season moved like a melody. They returned to the chateau. Their lives settled into a shared rhythm. And in the warmth of late summer, beneath the scent of roses and the music of songbirds, they married in the courtyard. The house transformed under Camille's touch, not just in neatness, but in spirit. Rooms that had slept in dust woke. Portraits that had looked stern seemed to smile. People who had once been afraid of the Baron felt the truth of him, that kindness, when practiced day after day, changes a person. If you're lying here now, listening, you might imagine the chateau at dusk, lanterns lit, roses trembling in a soft breeze, pages turning in the library. Let the image soothe you. Let the steady breathing you held earlier carry you deeper. In this tale, there is a gentle lesson that people can change, that compassion can break old curses, and that quiet, faithful work can make a home where none existed. Slowly now, breathe in and out. Allow your eyes to feel heavier. Let your shoulders sink into the mattress. Let the last thought of the day drift away on the same soft wind that ruffles the roses in the chateau's garden. Tonight, like Camille, you have tended something, perhaps a hope, perhaps a kindness. As sleep comes, imagine yourself in a warm room by a soft fire, favorite book, and the sound of leaves beyond the window. Good night. Drift into sleep gently. I'll be here when you wake, and there will always be another story to guide you into rest.